If there's one thing that's more worrying than the bleak global security situation, it's the Democratic leaders' uncertain responses, not least their response to the demonstrations in most Western cities against Israel and in favour of Palestine that degenerated in Sydney and elsewhere into disgusting anti-Jewish racism with simply horrific chants such as "Gas the Jews" and "F the Jews." Now, to the best of our knowledge, no one has been charged over these illegal demonstrations, notwithstanding the vast human rights anti-racist bureaucracy that would rightly come down massively on anyone chanting racist slogans against Aboriginal people, for instance, or against Palestinians. Yet you can't be selectively against racism, and if you are, the cry of racism is nothing but a self-serving slogan in a political campaign of identity politics. Likewise, for these anti-Semitic demonstrators and large numbers of Green left MPs here and abroad, there's not even moral equivalence between Hamas, terrorist statelet, and the Israeli government and her people. It's not "we condemn the deliberate, premeditated Hamas terrorist murder of almost 2,000 innocent civilians, and we condemn any disproportionate Israeli response." It's an all-out negative attack on Israel, and it's shamefully inaccurate, designed to provide a parallel propagandist narrative rather than fact-based truth. Epitomised, of course, by the BBC's inability to call the Hamas murderers terrorists. There's a sense that all the dead Israelis were somehow asking for it because they claim they're living on Palestinian land. Well, anything at all that Israel does to combat the terrorist leadership is immoral because, says its critics, it has no real right to exist. Now, this is at the heart of the horrors already seen in the Middle East and the possibly far greater horrors that are yet to come. The point-blank refusal of the Palestinian leadership to accept Israel's right to exist behind secure borders, and their death cult determination to inflict any possible barbarity in order to wipe Israel off the map. Indeed, this is the fundamental issue in all of the world's actual or potential war zones. The willingness of brutal dictators to kill without compunction for ideological ends. The Russian dictator doesn't care how many innocent civilians he kills, provided Ukraine is once more part of Greater Russia. The commissars in Beijing, well, they don't care how many Taiwanese civilians might die in any assault. They just fixate on seizing a practically independent democracy to prove that China is now a country to be reckoned with. And of course, the bloody massacres of Israeli citizens were almost celebrated, including in mosques, shamefully in mosques in Australia. Now, there's only one way to deter dictators bent on domination, and that's not to show fear or confusion in the presence of danger. It's to make it clear that they will not win. And we can but hope that President Biden has sent unambiguous messages to all of Israel's enemies, especially to their paymasters in Tehran, that there will be massive retaliation for any new attacks. But Biden is no Reagan, he's no Thatcher, he's no FDR. He's not a leader to be scared of. Indeed, for dictators like Putin and Xi, the current leader of the free world is less a threat than an opportunity. In the case of Ukraine, its friends, including Australia, well, we've sent weapons, but that's been enough to prevent an all-out defeat, but not enough to give Ukraine a realistic chance of driving the invaders out. And in the case of China, President Xi has made his determination to reunite China as he sees it during his own time as leader. Now, the clock's ticking. Xi is 70 years of age, so you can understand him thinking he may not get another chance like Biden. Hence the world's worry that he might just take it. Now, it's a mistake to see geopolitical issues through the prism of countries and not also through the prism of leaders, the human beings around the table when all the big decisions are made. It's this human factor, and I have seen it working for a Prime Minister, that can impact events and change the course of history in a moment. Which brings me to our own Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, who's talking about security against communist China in Washington only to undermine the message of democratic solidarity by going straight from Washington to Beijing. Now, thank God the hostage, Cheng Lei, has finally been released from her unjust imprisonment. But what commitments did the Albanese government give to extract this elemental human decency? Was it not to unpick the sale to Chinese interests of the Port of Darwin? Not to perhaps accelerate the acquisition of AUKUS submarines? Because despite the global gloomy outlook, there is nothing at all that the Albanese government is doing to strengthen our own short-term military capability. Indeed, all the evidence is that the rest of the military is being squeezed to fund an uncertain acquisition of submarines that's still years and years away. Greg Sheridan wrote last week in The Australian that Defence Minister Richard Marles is one of the worst defence ministers in decades. And there's no sign that that assessment is turning around.
Instead of being obsessed by the voice as the Prime Minister's been over the course of the last 17 or 18 months, Richard Marles and others have been completely and utterly distracted by the voice. I think all of them, frankly, have been so obsessed with the voice.
Meanwhile, due to emissions obsessions, it's captivating Canberra. None of our strategic challenges share those emissions obsessions. I mean, look at China. The government's weakening our economy and damaging our energy security. Now, ours isn't the only democratic government that's good at making announcements but hopeless at making a difference. Look, for instance, at the British government's chaotic inability to stop illegal boats crossing the Channel because it doubts its own right to say no to bogus asylum seekers. But when it comes to being performative rather than performing, actually getting things done, the Albanese government sure looks world-class. The fact that almost 2 weeks on from the rejection of its voice, it still can't say no to the whole rest of the Uluru Troika. Voice, treaty, truth. Well, this looks like paralysis in the face of hard decisions. This is a government and a Prime Minister in trouble.